The OCD and Anxiety Podcast by Robert James Coaching. Hello and welcome to the OCD and Anxiety Podcast, where we explore how to have a more positive relationship with anxiety disorders, taking back control so that you can start living the life you choose and not the one chosen by your fears. Hello and welcome to episode 394. I hope that you guys are doing very well today. Today I'm actually on the side of a big mountain called the Montseny, very close to Barcelona. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and although quite difficult sometimes to record a podcast whilst you're out in nature. So if you hear noises or if you hear Bruno digging a hole right next to me as he's doing right now, then my apologies for that, but hopefully we'll be okay. So, moving on. In today's podcast, I speak with the fantastic Dr. Metra, who is a researcher here in Barcelona. And we're talking about the environmental effects on mental health. If you live in a city, this could be a really interesting episode for you. We also look at the gut biome and importance of that for mental health too. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode. If you have any questions at all about anything we speak about today, do please let me know. And yeah, off we go. Hello, Dr. Metra. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
So here we are today. We are sat up in the Montseny Mountains, close to Barcelona, and we are doing an interview right here on this campsite, which is, an interesting place to do the interview. So it's great to have you on. Could you just give us some background to start with, please?
Yes, so I'm a research professor at IS Global, and I've been researching for years now the impact of the environment on mental health, in particular in children.
Fantastic. So could you tell us a bit more about that then? So how does the environment impact the mental health of children?
Yeah, so it's particularly interesting to look at how really early life and even in utero life, when we're in the womb of our mothers, have an impact on later on our development, on our brain development, that can have lifelong consequences on our mental health. And we don't often think about that. Yeah. Okay.
And so what are some of the, real kind of dangers or kind of negative things that can happen that may affect that kind of neurodevelopment?
So the way we look at it, I'm an epidemiologist, so we look at it at a population level. So at the population level, we find that some events during the early life, and one of the most famous study that's been looking at this of the early life impact on lifelong consequences is one about a famine. So how dietary scarcity in the Second World War happened in Holland. So only for 6 months, they didn't have access to food. And they followed up the mother that were pregnant at that time. They followed up the first and even the second generation, and they found that these people had a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. And this is just an indication on how the first 9 months, even when you're in the womb, it still has a high impact on later on. And what we find is that there is a lot of emphasis on cardiovascular disease, but now we're also looking at how it would affect the brain development. And we're particularly interested in pollutants. So we know, for example, there are industrial pollutants that affect the risk of, for example, developing ADHD. So, for example, lead exposure, that's still a big issue in the world. We're exposed to lead through certain paint, or it's in the water, and it depends a lot on where we live. But nowadays, we still have exposure to lead, and it's still a problem.
Yeah, I can see how this would be, really, really difficult particularly if you're living in an urban area, and you're kind of having to deal with these kinds of things on a day-to-day basis. So What are kind of some of the things that if you are living in a city and, this might be impacting you, what are some of the things that people could be doing to kind of help themselves?
Yes, so it's important, as I said, like we work at the population level. So some of the impact of our research is on the policy level. So for example, air pollution. We've done a lot of studies around school and how to reduce the air pollution around school, because we see that has an impact on the intellectual capabilities of the children there. But at the individual level, it's quite hard to avoid air pollution. We're not going to ask people to move. We can influence maybe the government to put schools in areas like further away from the highways, asking parents to not drive by the school, like organize a bit the traffic. At individual level, what you can do, there are things that are helpful, like expose yourself more to green space, walk around parks, even have some plants on your balcony. Some people are looking at this, like just having some flowers that can have a good effect on the mental health. So yeah, think more of the beneficial thing. Yeah, also diet, obviously. That's a very easy thing at the individual level to control better.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because obviously so many of us these days are living in cities, and, Barcelona, for example, is an amazing city to live in, but it's not the most green city. The parks aren't really that big, and, it's not the best thing for that. And so maybe kind of getting away for weekend breaks here and there, getting into nature and that kind of thing can be very beneficial. I certainly know from my own personal experience that, when I'm getting, anxious and my kind of, anxiety is getting higher, if I can get away and get into a green area for even just for a few hours, I really notice a difference to my mental health.
Yeah. So there is green space, but there's also studies on blue space. And for them, like living in Barcelona, it's relevant. Yeah, walking by the sea or going by a lake, or that's also, or by a riverside. Like there's a lot of cities now investing more on like adapting the riverside so you can walk past, and that's also very beneficial. Yeah. Blue space. I've
not heard it called that before, but definitely. I think that makes sense. No, because anytime that you spend more time in nature and you get away from all of this man-made stuff, it really does seem to make a big difference. So what other things have your studies uncovered in terms of kind of mental health?
Well, at the individual level, really the most important thing is social support, we find. And for children also, having the families that are connected. So having friends or family visits, that's actually highly correlated to a good mental health, even in children. That was quite interesting. And then also at the individual level, better diet, so more fruits and vegetables intake, that would be related. Even if we also find that fruit and vegetable intake is related to pesticide exposure, but it's still more beneficial than not having processed food and ultra-processed food.
Okay, so there's a couple of different things there. So obviously the first thing you were just talking about is the importance of social connection, spending time with family and friends. And again, we know that is so important in general for mental well-being. When we anecdotally, like we all know that ourselves, when we spend time with people, even if you might have social anxiety, you still want to spend time with people because we know it makes us feel better. No, and we're away here for a weekend with some friends, and this week for some reason was a bit of a struggle for me. I had more anxiety than normal, but I've come away to this green space close to Barcelona, beautiful mountains surrounded by trees, and with a bunch of friends, and it's, I'm already feeling much, much more relaxed. And I don't know about you, if that's the case for you too.
Yes, no, definitely. Also, we find, because we usually do just correlation studies. So we look at how close you live to a green space, and that's positive to health. But then we try to understand why. And one of the main things is that when you have parks or you have access to nature, it's actually also help your social connection. It's a place of socializing a park.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
yeah.
physical activity, obviously, because when you're in nature, you're more likely to walk around. You don't have to go for a big run or hike, like just like a little walking around is already helpful to be in movement and more likely to connect with people.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. And then the other thing you just mentioned was nutrition. You were kind of talking about the importance of eating vegetables and fruits to get fiber, I imagine, is a big part of that. But obviously talking about pesticides as well and trying to balance that out. But overall, it's still better despite the fact that there's pesticides. I imagine a lot of people who listen to this podcast are listening from the US. Here in Europe, we tend to have less pesticides, I think, than in the USA. So maybe it's different there. What do you think to that?
I'm not going to be able to compare exactly the level. I think it depends. Also in the US, there's a lot of difference between the states. So that's a bit complicated there. There is one thing about nutrition. So for years, we've been promoting the habit to eat fish. Obviously, in fish, there's a lot of good nutrients for the brain, the omega-3s, selenium, that's been studied. But we also know that fish, in particular, the one that are bigger, such as tuna, they accumulate a lot of pollutants that are not good for the brain. So one of our recent study, we focused on nuts because they're also full of omega-3s and other nutrients. And we've found results that in adolescents, we did an intervention and they had to eat walnut for a long term. And we kept doing cognitive assessment, so they had to do computer testing. So we had actually objective measurement on the brain function, and we found there was improved function after eating walnut. So we had a control group. So I thought that was very interesting because now it's not only about fish, but apparently we're eating walnut, which is then also accessible. It doesn't drain the ocean from the fish. Like, we also have to think about the impact of our diet in terms of sustainability. But eating nuts seems a very good thing.
Well, there we go, everyone. We have an answer here. Walnuts are the way forward. If you want to get those omega-3s, which again be really, really good for brain health, then that seems like a really good thing to do. Okay, and this is all really good information. I imagine it's quite exciting to kind of work in this area and do this kind of research now, and then be able to kind of make differences to kind of policies at a national level. So are you actually kind of influencing policy in Spain in that case, or is this a European thing that you're focusing on?
Yeah, so most of our research is funded by the European Commission. So at the policy level, we actually try to have influence on the local. We have several levels. So we work with the Ayuntamiento of Barcelona, so at the city level, because cities actually have a lot of power in terms of urban design. And for example, I was saying access to school, all of this, it's really at the city level. At the Spanish level, yet it has an impact, for example, to speak with the pediatrician societies, more at the clinical level. And at the European Commission, it's a lot about the chemical regulation. It's there, like, for example, endocrine disruptors. I don't know if you heard about it. Pesticide, this is all at the European Commission level. And then we work with NGOs that can have more lobby power there.
Yeah. I mean, this is really important stuff. I mean, obviously, when we're normally on this podcast, we're kind of talking about the symptoms of anxiety and OCD and kind of how to manage those things. But these environmental factors are actually, big contributors towards mental health in general. And I think when we get the basics right, when it comes to the environment, and we actually, maybe it's not going to cure OCD and anxiety, but it certainly helps. It makes a big difference. And so it's really good that there's people out there thinking about kind of policy and how we can adapt things and change things.
I think also it's important to remove a little bit the pressure at the individual level. A lot of these symptoms, I would say, they're also related to structural factors, how society are built and the environment. You don't necessarily have power on it at the individual level. So it's very important also to not feel guilty to have this feeling. No, it also comes from the outside and how the world function.
Yeah. Okay, one other thing I wanted to talk about is the gut biome, because this is another area of research for you. So could you tell us a little bit about the gut biome and how that can influence mental health as well?
Yeah, so there's really a lot of research at the moment on how our gut health is important for our mental health and vice versa, how mental health, depression, for example, can affect our gut health. And there's a lot of diseases that are linked to that. So, for example, irritable bowel syndrome, one of the treatment is take antidepressant, and that's not always what we think about. Or, for example, certain subtype of autism are related to intestinal infection by a certain bacteria called Clostridium difficile. So in terms of pathologies, some pathologies are clearly linked between the brain and our gut health.
Okay. And how does the kind of environment then influence that? Because obviously you were just talking quite a bit about the environment, and I imagine that there's, it gets impacted by pesticides, by pollutants. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting area, and we're still learning a lot because basically the bacteria in our gut help us to process our dietary intake, but also pollutants. So, for example, some heavy metals such as mercury or arsenic are processed and eliminated through our gut's microbiome. So they help us to get rid of it. Also, some, for example, ultra-processed food, which has a lot of edulcorant, for example, or saturated fat. The problem is that it would develop in our gut certain type of bacteria that are not so good for our general health and for our mental health. So I would say, in general, when we think about our environment, our gut health and our brain, we want to offer our microbiome good food that would help them produce better metabolism for our brain. So, for example, eating more fibers, so whole wheat, pasta, bread is better than white, and more fruits and vegetables also that helps our brain and our gut. So, for example, we know that most of the serotonin, so that's the neurotransmitter that makes us feel good, 75% of the serotonin is produced in the gut.
Wow.
It's huge. So it has a huge impact on how our brain function.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting because as most people listen to this podcast will know, the antidepressants, modern antidepressants are really working on serotonin and trying to increase it. And so obviously, if most of the serotonin is produced there in the gut, then it's super important, I imagine, that we get that right. So obviously there's a big link there between anxiety problems and having a good gut microbiome. So you just mentioned eating healthy food, eating lots of fruit and vegetables. Why that kind of food? Why does that help with the gut biome?
Yeah. So part of it is what you want is to reduce inflammation in your gut and increase the time that the food is processed in your gut to get as much nutrient as possible. So when you have fibers, basically it helps your gut to it takes more time for the gut to process it, which means you have more time for the intake of good nutrients and lower the systemic inflammation.
Fantastic. That's a really good answer there. Okay. Yeah, I think this is it's a really interesting area as well. Dr. Metra, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fantastic talking to you. Just a quick reminder that if you want to get a free session, all you need to do is to head over to my website, www.robertjamescoaching.com. And there you can leave me a message and we can arrange the free session. And now just a quick reminder of my disclaimer. Any information that you view on my website, Instagram page, Facebook group, or anywhere else online, or any information that you listen to on the podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for actual medical or mental health advice from a doctor, psychologist, or any other medical or mental health professional.